Good to go? Is this thing on? Hello. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit today about how open source is not the same as source available and how you can be at harmony with your open source community. So a little bit about me. I worked at Puppet for just over 6 years. I mostly worked on the Puppet Enterprise product. Before that, I worked at Intel for about 13. And right now, I'm doing Overlooking for Tech with Ben Ford here, trying the startup life. And I'm mostly focusing on the OpenVox Puppet fork, and so building out the essential tooling for that kind of thing. I basically only have GitHub, so if you want to contact me on social media, you're either out of luck or you can use Ben as a proxy. Or file a pull request. That's the best way. So a little bit about my story is I definitely did not start in an open source world. Intel was closed, everything was closed, and then Puppet, I worked on a closed source product, which wasn't my favorite thing, but I was always really drawn to the ethos of open source. I love how human it is, how unselfish, how generous it is. You get to work with people from all different backgrounds, all different paths through life, and you can learn quite a lot from people. To me, code is kind of like art. It's meant to be shared, not just sharing the end product. So I also like it's a little bit anti-capitalist. It's once your code is out there, it's out there. It can't be fully controlled by a megacorp. So that speaks to me. And then when I was in Puppet, I was part of the open source stewards group. So this was just a little team of a few people who were volunteers who were trying to keep the open source part of Puppet alive, working with the community, trying to address all the needs. This was very much an uphill battle because the company didn't really seem like they were prioritizing it, especially towards the end of my tenure there. We were doing it in our free time, oftentimes a little bit in secret, because if we weren't working on tickets in the sprint, we would get chastised. And Puppet just has a ton of repos, like 700 some or something. And so it was just impossible for our little team to really do the due diligence without strong buy-in from management. So I kind of saw, in the beginning, Puppet was a very good open source steward, and they were very communicative and open with the community. And then I saw it kind of deteriorate and the community start to kind of drift away, and the company losing connection with it. So let's start at the beginning. What causes a company to embrace open source in the first place? So you can build something really quickly. You have this great idea. You want to get it off the ground as fast as you can. You can pull these really high quality components that have their own communities around them and get your idea out the door. You have flexibility. You can customize the code however you want, and feed those changes back and help other people in the process. You've got a whole community for support, for bug fixes, and it's a lot of fun. You're kind of in the hacker phase, So in the beginning, and I should say this talk, I'm seeing it through my lens of Puppet mostly, but I think this applies more generally to pretty much any open source company. So in the beginning, you enthusiastically participate in the community. You're contributing code back. You find the value in the free labor, and you're providing your own. You're contributing back. And then you start to build a vibrant community around your product, hopefully. And in the beginning, you're probably very transparent. You're sharing your roadmaps, your features that you plan on doing, your struggles, and the whole community is with you, and you start building this really cool thing. And then at some point, you realize you have to make money to survive, and the cracks begin to show. And maybe you're trying an open core model, and you need certain things in the open source components that the community doesn't. or vice versa. Or maybe you want to cater to a certain market, like Fortune 500 companies, and you want to do something interesting, like build AI into your product or something that the community doesn't really want. And so your needs start to diverge from the community's needs. And you start prioritizing those instead of what the community needs. And so, a lot of times you're going for these quick wins. You're trying to, get features out the door as quickly as possible. And whatever the quickest path is to get there is the way you do it. And that isn't really how robust and healthy open source product functions very well. You don't want to put Band-Aids on Band-Aids on Band-Aids. A good open source product needs constant stewardship that you just start to feel like you don't have time to provide because you're trying to, meet these business needs, and maybe you have VC backers and they're demanding 10x return or something like that. And so what started as a partnership with your community really starts to feel like a slog. And then there's a slow attrition there. So more and more you kind of gradually drift away from your community, and the community kind of starts to drift away from you. They submit fewer PRs because when they do, they don't get any responses. And then at this point, your code is basically source available. Your code is in a repo. Everyone can look at it, but if you're not maintaining it, if you're not responding to people, it's not really open source. Your code is just there. And often companies don't really decide to abandon, a robust open source product or community. It's just kind of a matter of attrition and the pressures of business needs. So the community begins to feel neglected, and they begin to lose faith in the company's commitment, and it's not really a healthy, functioning open source community anymore. It's starting to wither on the vine. So then you might get into a tug of war, and the community might start trying to fill the gaps, and sometimes that's okay. They're doing things you don't care about anymore or something. But maybe they want to do things that don't align with your business needs, and there can be some conflict there. You may start to have this perception that the open source pieces are cannibalizing your profits, that these people working on the open source product are freeloaders and they're just, not giving anything back to you. You don't realize the value of their actual contributions. And so, the company might attempt to assert a bit more control. We've seen this in countless products. Closed source forking, that happened recently. Restricting access to repositories, changing licenses, that's happened a bunch. And then, limiting communication. So that really leads to a lot of trust lost from the community. And once you lose that trust, it's really hard to gain it back. You have to do a whole lot more to gain your trust of your community back. So trying to assert control is always a losing game. And this isn't just true for open source, it's really true in life. It's human nature to want to control your environment, gives you a sense of safety. But the more you embrace that you can't control things, the better off you'll be. Control might work at first. You might be able to direct the way the community's going and limit what they're doing. But if you work collaboratively with them, it is far more sustainable and successful in the long term. A dictatorial system is always going to lose in the end. And I realize the irony of an American saying that in 2025 right now. But eventually, all empires that are ruled with an iron fist by a dictator, they fall. People rise up and they assert their freedoms. And it's really not that different in open source. If you try to assert control over your community, they're not going to have that. So don't do it. And so a lot of this stems from a misunderstanding of the business model. And you might have heard Stephen Wally say this in FOSDEM. You should treat your community as upstream and your customers as downstream. So your community is your brain trust. They're trying out different things with your product. They're helping to build a fantastic core. They think of use cases you haven't thought of. Many of them are probably more familiar with the code and better with the code than your engineers are, because they spent so much time playing with it. And that was very true for Puppet. There are a lot of people in the Vox community, probably most of the people in the Vox community write better Puppet code than I do. And that's how it should be. That's absolutely how it should be. Your actual paying customers are downstream. So, maybe you're doing open core, maybe you're selling support and services, or you're building a product on top of your open source product. And sometimes your people in your community end up being your customers, but it's a different relationship there when they're your customers versus when they're a part of your community, and you treat them upstream. They are the foundation of your product, of your company. They are the thing for which, if they don't exist, your company very well may wither and die. And I think a lot of open source companies don't realize that. They think that the closed source code that they write is the foundation, is the most important thing. It's really not. So invest in people, not just code. And open source software is far more about people than it is about computers. Open source projects are like villages of people. It's a lot better and easier to work collaboratively with people than to go to war with them. And it costs time, it costs money, but you both benefit if you are not at war and working together. So mutual respect, compromise, transparency, honesty. These are all things that make a good human relationship. It's the same for open source products. So when you're starting an open source company, make this a core value from day one. Build it into your bylaws. That's what we're doing with our company. Our bylaws, we're a B Corp, and so we are required to benefit the community in everything that we do. And so another thing is, a few times in my career I've been a manager. I try not to be. I like to write code more. But one of the primary tenets of management that I always try to follow is leading from behind. So let the community shine. Their successes are your successes, and vice versa. You don't need to be out in front. You don't need to be telling people where to go and what to do all the time. Lead from behind. Be the guy in the back of the crowd, all celebrating together. I think it's also really important to build organizational diversity early on. So, in the beginning, your community is going to be small, and you're starting a brand new thing. But as it grows, like 80% of your community should not be your employees. You should have try to attract people from a bunch of different backgrounds outside your company. And of course, still have your employees contribute, but that diversity is really key. And if you mistreat the people that you're playing the game with, soon you'll just be playing with yourself. Nobody wants to see that. So don't do that. So a few more things about cultivating your community. Demonstrate appreciation. Again, this is just a good way of being a human and being a leader. Appreciate all the things that the community does for you. They're giving you their time, their sweat, their hard work. Acknowledge them individually. Highlight them. Don't always highlight yourself. And transparency, I'll say again, is just really key. Two-way communication. There will probably be a tendency to want to keep your roadmaps private. The different ideas you have for your product. But they don't need to be. Communicate those with your community. Show your upcoming wins and the challenges that you've had. And if you're open and honest with them your community will be with you during the hard times. They'll help you through the hard times because you've treated them right. And oftentimes they become friends, and it just works out better in the end for your company. So keep everything public and accessible. Obviously your code, since it's open source, but also your build and test pipelines, work out in the open, overshare if you need to. Err on the side of oversharing. I'm going to speed through this since I'm running out of time. Eventually, the pointy-haired bosses will show up, and when they do, it'll be really helpful if you can tie all of your community work to metrics, and not just vanity metrics, but metrics that actually mean something, and you can tie to things like return on investment that they care about. So this Chaos project is a really, really useful tool. It was started by Dr. Don Foster and a few others, I believe. Go take a look at this website. There's a lot of great stuff in there, like you can measure like the cost to fix a bug that the community has freely done for you, time to launch a feature, marketing value of your brand. Costs of recruiting are lower because you have a highly qualified pool of candidates in your thriving community. And you can use this framework to tie that to money. And then, of course, have frank conversations with your contributors. In particular, you don't ask what they like or don't like. Ask what triggers their changes in behavior. Those pointy-haired bosses don't always care so much if contributors are happy, even though they should. But they do care if they stop contributing. So this is that part of that two-way communication that makes for a healthy community. And so if a lot of this sounds like DevRel, it is DevRel. It's developer relations. And if you're lucky enough to have a DevRel team, they need your help to implement all of these. So talk to your DevRel experts. If you don't have any, then at least make this language a habit and remember that the heart of open source is humanity. And just be good to each other, be good to your community, they'll be good to you. Thanks for your attention.